Hey class, this is your instructor Jack. I thought I'd go over some of the more common uses of the comma. Of all the punctuation marks there are, I think there are 14 in English language. Comma seems to present most issues for most people. I'm not sure exactly why, but so I wanted to go over some of the common uses and misuses of the comma. Very often you'll see a comma, you've got for whatever purposes in writing, you choose to join two sentences together into one sentence for literary effect, for power sometimes. Um, and so we'll take the sentence. The writing class was long, but parts of it were mildly interesting. First of all, I wanted to just mention anytime you see the word but in the middle of a sentence, I can't think of an exception to this rule. Put a comma in front of it. But here you've got, where did they go? Whoops. Writing class was long, but parts of it were mildly interesting. So you've got a complete sentence. The writing class was long. And you have a complete sentence. Parts of it were mildly interesting. So we're going to join it with what's called a conjunctive word. In this case, we're using the term but, which means we're kind of shifting gears on the writer. The writing class was long, but I'm going to tell you something different about that than it was simply just long. I could have used or yet. Parts of it were mildly interesting. And these conjunctive words you see most often: and, but, or, nor, for, so, yet. Um, and the reason you want to be using these is if I have a sentence that reads, the writing class was long, and say there is no conjunctive word, which I see quite often, parts of it were mildly interesting. This is what's called a run-on sentence. I have two sentences joined with nothing but air between long and parts. If I put a comma in there, this is an error known as a comma splice. I've got two complete sentences joined by nothing but a comma. So those are two of the common errors you do not want to make. And here you see that this bluish squiggly line appears before the word long. If you right click on the word whenever you see that bluish line, it'll tell you what the error is. Here it's suggesting that I could put in a semicolon after the word long, which is true. I could separate two sentences with a semicolon. I would not capitalize parts in that case. In this case, I'm going to leave it as but parts of it were interesting. So that's kind of the main clause use of the comma. Here's another example. She is a recognized artist. She has won many awards. As it stands, it's a run-on sentence. Two sentences joined by nothing but air. If I put in a comma but nothing else, I've got a comma splice. And it's really, right, readers get mad at that because the comma suggests that there's some connection, that you're going to finish a thought. But you're not really. You've already finished the thought. She's a recognized artist. And the next thing that follows is another thought. She's won many awards. So if you want to show the relationship between those two, you could use for example, um, as, for example, and, for example, as long as you use something. So we'll go with for. She has won many awards. So that's when you're joining two independent clauses. I wanted to say a word about non-essential clauses, and that's when you have information you've included in your sentence which is not essential to the main idea. It doesn't mean it's pointless. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be there. It just means that it's sort of parenthetical in a way. It's additional information. So, for example, a company which is 10 years old develops software. Now here, again, Microsoft Word has underscored this with a squiggly blue line, and see what it suggests is her company, which is 10 years old, and in this case, MS Word is exactly right. We want to take and bracket the which is 10 years old clause because it's really non-essential information. What do I mean by that? Well, if we take it out altogether, um, her company develops software. There's the complete thought. If I want to include some additional information, but it's non-essential, again, I bracket it with commas so that the reader will know it's non-essential, as opposed to what? Essential information. Residents who are committed to recycling rarely complain about separating their trash. So if I take out this clause here, residents who are committed to recycling, and I have residents rarely complain about separating their trash. That's a much different sentence. Here I'm implying that nobody complains about it. Well, that's not true. But if you happen to be someone who is a resident who is into recycling, then you won't complain. The other thing to keep in mind is how does this sound when I speak it aloud? Take these two sentences. Her company, which is 10 years old, develops software. So you probably heard that pause, and that's why I often suggest to writers that if you've got questions about where a comma goes, insert a pause. I'm sorry, read it aloud, and that'll tell you where the pauses should go. Residents who are committed to recycling rarely complain. When I read that out loud, you don't hear the pause. I don't mean for there to be a pause. So those non-essential clauses, you can bracket them with commas. The commas will always be in pairs, as I mentioned here. They can also be dashes or parentheses. So depending on what effect you're trying to reach with the reader, I could say, as we just mentioned, John, the recognized leader of the team, fired the first shot. So in this case, again, I'm going to bracket it with commas. And the mistake I often see is people are pretty sure there's a comma that should go somewhere in there, so they'll put one but not the other. Remember, you're thinking about these commas almost as if they're parentheses. So you look at the last example, John, the recognized leader of the team, fired the first shot. Parentheses says to the reader, you can really completely ignore what's inside the parentheses and still not miss any of the information or not miss the meaning of my main idea. The other thing you can do is you can really sort of interrupt yourself if you think it's really, you want to draw additional or special attention to something, and put in what I call an M dash. I don't call it, it's what it's called. It's two dashes with no spaces in between the words that precede and the words that follow. So, John, the recognized leader of the team, fired the first shot. When you use the M dashes, you're sort of pointing to what's in the middle to say, I want you to really take note of this, which is really kind of opposed to the idea of the parentheses, which is you can ignore this if you like. So that's essential and non-essential clause stuff. Let's talk about an introductory clause for a second, because we use them a lot in the English language. Take this example here. Even though she had led throughout the race, she fell hard near the finish. So the main idea is here, what? Even though she had led throughout the race, she fell? Or she fell hard near the finish. If you mean for the main idea to be she fell hard near the finish, and here's what MS Word is telling me as well, put a comma, let's see. I right click, yep, she wants me to, MS Word, genderless MS Word, even though she had led throughout the race, she fell hard near the finish. So to let the reader know when the introductory information is finished, often in the introductory information just provides context, maybe location or some time, chronology, whatever. But it's not the main idea, but it's important. And we often talk that way. Take a look at the second example. In the lengthening shadows, he knelt to touch the ground. So is the main idea in the lengthening shadows he knelt, or is the main idea he knelt to touch the ground? Well, MS Word thinks, and I agree since I'm the author, that the main idea is he knelt to touch the ground. And the lengthening shadows kind of gives a setting to it, if you will. So, and you want to use an introductory clause, comma, to kind of set that apart from the main idea. And sometimes you'll have several introductory clauses. There's nothing wrong with that either. By April 1865, it was clear the South had few options. So again, the idea is I want to interject a comma after 1865. Now, if there had been an actual date in here for some reason, April 18th, for example, April 12th, say, April 12th, 1865, then I would include a comma after the date, the day, as well as the year. But in this case, since it's month and year, I'm not going to include a comma in between, but definitely a comma after the year, which also happens to be the end of the introductory clause. So that's introductory clause. With transitional expressions, we have some interesting words in the English language that we can kind of move around inside of a sentence. So take this one here. She did not know he was married until after their second date, however. However is one of those words that I could pick it up if I want and move it to the beginning of the sentence. I'm not going to make all the changes in what should be capped and small cased and all that. I just want to, well, I just did that. But, so I could move it to the beginning. However, she did not know he was married. I could also move it to the middle of the sentence. She did not know he was married, however, until after their second date. Another example of these is of course. So of course could be she never saw him again after she learned this. Of course. I could also move it to she never saw him again, of course, after she learned this. So again, I'm not going to tidy up all the small cases, and this obviously comma should go away. So other words that kind of fit this example also, it's another one of those words that can be moved around in the sentence for whatever effect you're trying to achieve. Moreover, for example, here's one for example, Jack seldom posted grades on time. I could lift, for example, Jack seldom, for example, posted grades on time. I could do, what else? What other magic? I could say Jack seldom posted grades on time, for example. And for example, you're probably sick of this example, but wanted to say a final word, I guess, about series items, because this is always a hot button discussion item for some reason. If I have a series of nouns to complete a sentence or somewhere in the middle of sentences, we know, for example, I favored my eggs with Tabasco, cheese, mushrooms, and ham. The question often comes up, I put a comma after Tabasco, a comma after cheese. Do I put one after mushrooms? Well, some people say, well, that's, it's up to you. It's an option. Well, the problem I have with that is when I read it as a reader, should I assume that you exercised your option not to put a comma here, but that otherwise I should assume that mushrooms and ham is on the same level, if you will, as cheese and Tabasco? Or should I assume that mushrooms and ham have a special relationship here so that, for example, if I don't have ham, then I shouldn't put mushrooms in it either, because mushrooms and ham go together in the same way that cheese goes together and Tabasco goes together. My favorite example of this is what I like to call the $1 million comma. You saw the example of the $10 million comma. That was a hoot too. But here's an example of what I call the $1 million comma. Upon his death, I left my name out here. I'll put Jack. Willed his entire $12 million fortune to Sarah, Eric, David, and Elodie. Hope I pronounced that right. So I know I put a comma here, right? Sarah, Eric. Now, if I am David or Elodie, what am I praying I will find after David? Well, I'm praying I'll find a comma because it's worth $1 million to me. Well, what do I mean by that? If David and Elodie, for the purposes of the will reading, are being treated as a single entity on the same level as Eric and Sarah, then I have three entities: Sarah, Eric, David, and Elodie, those three entities. And that means I'm going to take 12 million divided by 3, and each of you gets $4 million. Only poor David and Elodie have to split their $4 million, right? So they each get only $2 million. If, on the other hand, I put a comma in here, then it's clear there are 4 entities sharing $12 million. Sarah and Eric don't like it much because they're going to get $3 million, but we all get $3 million, and that's better than nothing, right? So that's an example of the $1 million comma. Hope you have found this helpful, and if you can think of other things you'd like me to talk about, a treat in a screencast, I'd be happy to. And hope you're having a good week. Talk to you soon.